As you probably know, in recent years, some artistic proposals have appeared combining baroque music with some flamenco palos, some of them amazing. In episode 14 of the podcast Forgotten Sounds of Flamenco, we will talk with Emil Rzajev, who has just finished his master's degree in ethnomusicology at UNAM, Mexico, with a dissertation where he analyzed the so-called barrocho, or combination of baroque pieces with sones jarocho, an analogous phenomenon to what happened in flamenco. Don't miss it.
Sounds that once were listened. Sounds that once were enjoyed. Sounds that once were danced. Sounds relegated to oblivion. And yet, there is still something we can do for them. Let us summon them. Let us summon them.
Welcome to the podcast Forgotten Sounds of Flamenco. My name is José Miguel Hernández Jaramillo, and I invite you to enroll in this journey through the sounds, stories, spaces, and people that were part of the 19th century flamenco. Hi, I hope you are very well, and thanks very much for listening to a new episode of this podcast. You can find us on the leading podcast platforms as well as on YouTube. In recent years, some artistic proposals have appeared, especially from early music performers, which combine 13 sounds or popular themes with pieces from the academic repertoire. In flamenco music, we can also find this trend, and musicians such as Fami or Rami Arcai, Andreas Priwitz, Mariel Luevano and Tembembe Ensemble Continuo, the Andalusian Chamber Orchestra, or the Salamanca Baroque Orchestra, among others, are integrating flamenco music with baroque pieces. Usually, both academic and flamenco musicians participate in this type of artistic proposal. And it is here where some exciting questions arise, such as how this link is made between music so distant in time, if this link is done for strictly aesthetic reasons, if there is some kind of musical relationship between the baroque and flamenco pieces that are performed together, or to what extent these proposals are having an impact on both the world of early music and flamenco. In the absence of research works in flamenco that answer these questions, today we have an extraordinary guest who has deeply studied an analogous phenomenon, in this case between baroque music and the so-called jarocho, mainly from the region of Veracruz in Mexico. Today, Emil Rzajev is with us, who just obtained 2 weeks ago a master's degree in ethnomusicology at the Faculty of Music of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, with a dissertation entitled Entre lloronas e imposibles, la configuración del son barrocho. This title in English could be Between lloronas and imposibles, the configuration of the son barrocho. This dissertation obtained an honor mention, and I had the honor of participating as a member of his tribunal. Emil has kindly accepted the invitation to participate in this episode. He can undoubtedly provide us some keys to better understand how this creative process is articulated and its implication on the son jarocho and, in our case, on flamenco. Let's listen to the interview we had a few days ago.
Emil, thank you for accepting the invitation to participate in this podcast.
Thanks to you, José Miguel. It is a pleasure to follow the content of the Forgotten Sounds of Flamenco and now to be on another side of the audio.
First of all, I would like you to comment briefly on your hardness as a performer of baroque music, harpsichord, viola da gamba, and also jarocho music with the jarana. For example, how did the encounter of these two worlds so distant but at the same time maybe so close come about?
Well, I come from a family with a high propensity for the arts. My parents are architects, they were dancers, and I listened to a lot of music. I always wanted to play the piano. Then I got to know the harpsichord through some recorded and re-recorded cassettes of Bach's music. And I loved Baroque music. I spent a good part of my life there. And also because at home we listened to a lot of Mexican folk music because that's what my parents danced to. I also grew up listening to son jarocho. And later on, along with my training as a musician at the Escuela Nacional de Música de México, now Facultad de Música, I asked for some son jarocho classes, some jarana classes, and I got more involved. I was just looking for tools in son jarocho to better understand the whole part of improvisation that in Baroque music is said to be used a lot, but, well, At least there is no declared method to learn it or to do it, and there I found myself very comfortable.
Well, I would like you to tell us briefly what barrocho is, how your research has been, and what conclusions you draw from it.
Well, barrocho is this contemporary coincidence, at least from a few 30 years ago, between the Son jarocho scenes, even just some other so-called traditional music. There is my kitty greeting the audience through the apartment, and combining traditional music as Son jarocho, and adding ancient music, which is also an extensive category, emphatically baroque music. From there baroque and jarocho becomes barrocho, which, in the case of my research, I wanted to emphasize in some sonas called jarochos, which musically many people in my community have been linking for some years with European laments of the 17th century, and have made an emphasis in the musical and semiotic concordances of these two repertoires, just wanting to trace genealogy, or a unique thread or narrative. And when I tried to undertake this research, I found an extreme documentary gap. At least in Mexico, no document talks about jarochos during the whole 19th century. There are no scores. There is a brief mention in a denunciation of the 18th century that prohibits the son de la llorona, among many other sonas, of which we do not have some either. Of others we do have the music, but in the face of this gap, I needed to change the argument of my research. And instead of focusing on the historical background of the Son jarocho, per se, the emphasis should be on this new creation, which is a new way of reinterpreting the Son jarocho, now using instruments typical of the early music sound, using baroque guitars, using gut strings, using harpsichords, violas da gamba. Now these music are reinterpreted, which are usually performed in the character of a party by musicians who do not usually play these instruments.
Well, you had just defended your master's thesis on the so-called barrocho, or union or link between baroque and jarocho music. Since when did this barrocho scene begin to develop?
I have news that around the 80s, around 1985, there have already been in Mexico musicians interested in the specifically Novo Hispanic music and the jarocho music, that coexisted and that exchanged ideas, points of view, music. And around the year 92, with all this furor of the 5th centenary of the encounter of Europe with America, then the place for expressions like the barrocho was reinforced. There until the date, thus we continue like that.
Normally, what is done in these baroque musical proposals is to unite in some way in the same piece certain sones jarochos with baroque works or sones that keep some kind of musical similarity, typically rhythmic or harmonic, right? I wanted to ask you if, behind these proposals, is there any historical or musical research work that suggests some kind of link between them, or if, on the contrary, the predominant criterion is that of mere musical similarity or merely an artistic proposal.
Above all, the purely musical link predominates, sometimes some semiotic related to nomenclature, for example, the emphasis in the canarios that appear in many historical sources, but emphatically I don't know why emphatically the canaries of Gaspar Sanz, as for example musical expressions are known as canaries here in the Huasteca in Mexico, that is not a jarocho, but by adjacency, it remains as part of the scene.
Well, from what I see, in the world of flamenco, it seems that the musicians who have made these proposals have taken as a base research of certain flamencologists who have linked baroque sones with current flamenco palos. I wonder if in the world of the barrocho or in the research of the barrocho the same thing happens.
Of course, because, especially in the case of the so-called ancient music, it has been in the academic environment where they have had a more important place. I would dare to think that in the whole world, that emanates from a literate world, from a vision of music from the literate, and that at least in Mexico, the scene of ancient music has coincided in that literate environment as well as from a folklorist vision in the approach to popular music of another character not thought of the academy. Yes, many times from the institutions, these contemporary interpretations of these ancient texts can be legitimized as an indissoluble truth. It seems essential to me, also from the position of the world of the academy, from my part, to put the focus of attention to the fact that the reality that we build with our writings with our interpretations is quickly canonized and can be considered irrevocable, indisputable, and fixed, as proper. And in these historical themes, a new piece of information often appears and moves us. That is why I enjoy emphasizing how this new music scene that has taken place in Mexico is allowing us to rethink the present. I imagine that its concomitances will perhaps have in Spain.
As you probably know, in flamenco, we are very fond of looking for the origins and evolution of the different flamenco palos. Well, the palos are what would be equivalent to the sones jarochos, right? And some people are taking these artistic proposals that are being made from flamenco as another argument to defend certain flamenco genealogies, which would go back to the baroque era. In my opinion, this can be dangerous because, far from clarifying how flamenco was shaped, it can be another weapon of mass confusion that is so difficult to reverse from the flamenco mind of flamenco fans. Is the same thing happening in the jarocho world?
I believe that this confusion can happen because being in front of music that has been throughout the history of a solid oral character, we do not necessarily have a significant amount of written testimonies that allow us to establish a direct link to established genealogies. So when genealogy is decreed, we can be obscuring other perspectives, other possible influences. I would instead emphasize that we are generating a new version of the present. In the case of the barrocho here in Mexico, of course, by rethinking history, we are rethinking our present. I believe that what has empowered the son barrocho is to think that there does not have to be a sharp distinction between, let's say, academic or courtly music and other more popular, festive street music, because if in different centuries it was not like that, nowadays it should not have to be like that either.
Yes, besides the academic part or the written music of that time, it suffered, as you say, a lot of popular music, which was very common at that time. And I say it is dangerous because, of course, people, for example, in flamenco, hear that a particular flamenco style is similar to a baroque work, so it is straightforward to establish that genealogical line I am talking about, skipping a sign and a bit, because from baroque to flamenco as we know it today, which was basically formed in the 20th century, the current flamenco aesthetics is not so old. Of course, there is a gap of about a century and a half that is difficult to justify. So I think that, for example, there is a lack of much more research, and that is what some people are doing, of historical type, to see if those links really, if that musical similarity really has a historical justification or not, or if it is a coincidence.
A dear friend of mine, Ricardo Gallardo, who knows a lot of world music and also contemporary avant-garde music, says that the most avant-garde music and the most modern music is ancient music, since the category of old music is an invention of our temporal proximities, and that finally the reality that we see in that music, we do not know for sure if it was like that in those centuries. We have specific documents and testimonies to imagine, reconstruct and tie up ends. Still, it is complicated to know precisely how it was, and for the same reason, generating these genealogies can be truculent than it seems.
Well, Emil, thank you very much, first of all, for the contributions you present in your thesis. I recommend to the people who are listening to the podcast to download it from the UNAM website. It is fascinating and very entertaining. And also, thank you very much for accepting the invitation to participate in the podcast.
Thank you very much. And indeed, here in the podcast's description, we will leave a link to the thesis. We invite you to read it to tell us what you think. Do you know similar musical expressions in your countries? What have you heard? What does it remind you of? And well, we generate knowledge among all of us, and in these discussions, we nourish ourselves.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, this was a fascinating interview with Emil Rzajev. If you are interested in learning more about his work, you can download it for free from the link I left in the YouTube video of this episode in the channel Sonidos Olvidados Ethnomusicology Creativa. By the way, if you go to the channel, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done it already. I would like to highlight many things from this interview. I think it's very important to enjoy this artistic proposal from the contemporary, from a scene that has appeared in the last 2 or 3 decades, music to be heard in all days, rather than looking for a historical link between the pieces that are merged. And to illustrate this, I will give you an example. When Fami Alcai and the flamenco singer Arcángel, 2 of my favorite musicians, play together at 17th century guaracha with a flamenco guajira, the result is incredible, still beyond the fact that both pieces share certain music elements such as harmony or rhythm. I deeply researched the guajira in my doctoral dissertation and I didn't find any direct link between them, so we must be cautious not to establish a phylogenetic line between them. Finally, I'd like to recommend you that if you are in Mexico City, don't miss the concerts that Emil performs as Dr. Versalles, where baroque pieces, cumbias and sones jarochos are combined in the hands of Emil at the harpsichord and clavichord. I hope this show can reach other American and European countries. This episode was a bit longer than usual, but it was worth it, and I hope you like it. See you back here in 2 weeks.